afternoon. I'm Lesley Fleming, and I am joined by Shauna Farmer. And this session is being delivered by the Florida Horticulture for Health Network. And today's topic is school gardens, which obviously we're all excited about. Just before we get into the topic, let me just share the Florida Horticulture for Health Network offers a lot of resources, and you can see on this screen that we have a website, we have a resource hub, we have webinars, networking forums, and one of the features that we have, which was just put on the Florida Network YouTube channel, is a video that I think we participating in today's session would be interested in. And the topic is sowing cemeteries and seed libraries at Shipley School's horticulture program. So you can access that through the Florida Network website, or you can go on to the YouTube channel and take a look at it. It had a lot of really exciting ideas that are not just for school gardens, but I think a lot of the applications apply to populations across the board. So we're going to record this, as Jessica stated, and thank you, Jessica, for being the tech support for Shauna and myself. After today's session, we are going to send out a handout with resources that Shauna and I have pulled together related to school gardens. There's an overwhelming amount, which is fabulous that there's so much information out there, but these are resources that we have used. Many of them would be on the Florida Network Resource Hub, and hopefully it might be able to narrow down the search and save you some time. So Shauna and I are hosting this networking forum, and thank you all for joining. I see Sarah Sterling has joined us. She was the presenter for the video, the webinar, the Sowing Cemeteries and Seed Libraries. That's awesome. And I see Susan Morgan has joined us as well. Julie was first one in, nice one. And Shauna and I and Jessica are helping to make this happen. So let me start off by saying Shauna has a horticultural therapy certificate and is very active with school gardens and other populations in Chapel Hill area. I'm in Florida, not presently, but live in Anna Maria, and I have volunteered with school gardens in Florida as well as Texas. So we bring a little bit of experience, but the whole point of the networking forums that we're doing as part of the Florida Network is to gather information from all of you and share resources. That's one of the goals of the network. So what we're going to do, Shauna's going to start us off in a minute with a wonderful analogy leading us into school gardens. And then what seems to work quite well is that we go through a roll call. So we'll call on each of you, asking you to share what's working at your school garden. And if you are just listening and you don't, have anything to share, you prefer to listen, that's fine. Just say I'm listening and I'm learning. That's good too. And when we go through the roll call, we'll see how much of the hour we can cover. If we have a little bit of extra time, perhaps we move into what are some of the challenges related to school gardens. And, that may come up in the discussion as well. But we find that this process has worked well in sharing ideas. Some of the other networking forums that we've done, and Shauna reminded me of the one for senior population, we actually wrote an article based on the great ideas that were shared in this forum. And so that might be a possibility as well. And additionally, based on, this recording, perhaps it will come a video as well, which we put on the YouTube channel. So with all of the logistics out of the way, I'm going to call on Shauna. How about you start us off with that wonderful analogy that you shared with me a little while back?
Thank you, Lesley, and thanks for asking me to be here. Carol, you've already heard the analogy. Carol and I were classmates together at HTI for our HT certificate. So, Carol, hopefully I get it right again this time. My analogy is one that I came up with actually as part of the class to my project that I developed for my class was regarding school gardens. And one of the challenges has been helping people understand the role of horticulture therapy at a school garden. So my analogy is that I ask people to think about a gym full of exercise equipment, and then to imagine all of the different people that can use the gym. Of course, you'd have a gym teacher that could teach students physical education or particular sport. You might have a personal trainer at a gym helping a client try to achieve specific fitness goals. And then you could have a physical therapist who's working with a patient to achieve specific therapeutic goals. Then I explain that instead of a gym, now think about a garden. At a school, of course, teachers, and we know any subject, not just science, teachers can use the garden in their curriculum. You might have a subject specialist, like master gardeners come in and teach a particular horticulture topic at the garden. And then finally, horticulture therapy can help students or other clients achieve specific therapeutic or vocational or wellness goals. And like I said, originally it was to help people understand horticulture therapy, but I think also it's a valuable analogy because it shows that a school garden is not really the domain of any particular group of people. And instead, it can help demonstrate the overlapping and complementary roles that all of the different folks who might use the garden might have in school-based people-plant interactions.
Wonderful. And I do think that that's the great benefit of what we're doing, using the people-plant interactions and the people-plant foundation. It provides so many different platforms and applications. And I think that speaks to the strengths of those of us who are working in the field, as well as addressing the needs of the people that we're working with. So Shauna, that's a great analogy. Why don't you start off by sharing one of your tips, what's working at your school garden, and then we'll kind of go through and each one of us will have a chance to share an idea.
Sure.
Just before you start, Shauna, Jessica, how about taking down the Florida Network screen, please? Great. Okay, we're ready for your great tip, Shauna.
Perfect. So a tiny bit of background. The school garden I volunteer at most is a middle school garden, and I work mostly with the kids in what we call the adapted curriculum classroom, so the kids with special needs. But I have a couple teachers that are willing to send their students out to me for 15 minutes at a time in the morning before class starts. And those are kids of a variety of abilities. We're working toward having a school garden club, but COVID and everything else has made the whole school kind of upside down. So we're working pieces at a time. So the most successful program this fall was actually one of our solutions to the summer challenge of what do you do with a school garden during the summertime. What we chose to do were to grow things that would require some weeding and some watering, but not a lot of harvesting. So we had a big sweet potato bed. But the thing I'm most excited about is that we grew popcorn, and it was part of a Three Sisters circles. But our beans, we chose beans that we grew to harvest and dry, so we didn't have to pick beans all summer. We had winter squash, and then our corn was popcorn. And I think it was successful because it provided opportunity for multiple times to interact with the kids. First of all, there was something fascinating for the kids to see when they got back to school, because when they left school, they had just planted little corn kernels, and then they came back and it was 10 feet tall. So it was just amazing for them to see. The teachers actually were impressed too, so that was nice. But then by the time you harvest the corn and then you husk the corn, you let the corn dry, and then you remove the corn from the cobs, then you test the corn to see if it's popping and stuff. It's been a long process that I've been able to involve a lot of kids over time. And now we're at the eating stage, so that part's the most exciting. So I have to say, it's not the best popping corn. I think we let it dry too long, but that's just more to learn for next year. And the kids haven't minded too much that they don't get 5 cups of popcorn from a quarter cup of kernels or anything. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's wonderful. I like the point that you shared that you are working with middle school students. And I think that sometimes our perspective is on the grades or the students that we're working with. And school gardens really cross all grades and all age groups and all students' abilities as well as staff abilities, including college and university school gardens. They're usually not called school gardens at the post-secondary institutions, but they seem to run the gamut of food security. That seems to be the focus with the older grades. I'm impressed with how you've been able to integrate historical context through the garden and also cultural sensitivity with the Three Sisters Garden. So, I think the breadth of applications that we can do with any of our people-plant interactions is pretty fantastic. But school gardens, I think, you know, again, there are those of us who maybe have the HT background, and then there are a lot of people who come to it as, you know, horticulturists or school gardeners. And I'm seeing more collaboration between those three disciplines. Julie mentioned before we formally started this that she's, and correct me if I'm wrong, Julie, counseling background. So maybe when we come to you, and Julie, why don't you maybe go next, share your idea and just tell us about, you know, your garden and what is working for you.
Okay. For my garden, the neat part for me was I got to design it. So I have the accessibility that I would want, but I'm still lacking. I mean, I still need budgeting to get more accessibility. If I had an individual that was, I mean, I need some walkways per se. I too have taken the HT certificate. I haven't finished the last class, and I did some of the UK trainings. And I have to be honest, the UK trainings were awesome. He really made me feel like I could do it. And so I did it. And now I'm 3 years in this program. I guess the piece for me is that in my program, based on where everybody's at, I'm creating more play-based zones for the kids that are incorporating nature. So I'm looking at loose parts. I really am looking at all of that foundational piece because I have a pretty big yard for the kids. So that when I'm gone, so to speak, they're still engaged in the mud kitchen and some of the play-based pieces, because that's not just the growing piece. I'll be honest, I'm a gardener. Sometimes I feel like in a garden with raised beds, it's kind of like after you put them in, you're done. We don't have a lot of maintenance. And I provide 18 therapy hours to kids and adults. So I have to have a myriad of stuff I'm going to do. So in some ways, I'm the preschool, early childhood, kinder music, because I have kinder music training. I didn't know there was a nature-based training, so I could do that. I've been getting emails from them saying, do you want to be I don't know, it's another garden trainer. And I thought, well, that's interesting because I'm pulling from all sorts of curriculum. So I'm doing crafts that incorporate horticulture. I might be in the garden yard. I am lucky because I do have that mental health perspective so that I can apply behavior analysis ideas into the garden. I can use behavioral principles. I know when they're sensory seeking. I have replacement behaviors that I'm doing along with my staff because my whole goal is that they have a fun hour, if you know what I mean. And then my whole goal is that there's extensions through the week that when I walk in my 3 times, the kids are sharing with me, Miss Julie, did you see this bird or this, or they're making stuff and adding to the foundation I might have done. And I think Pinterest, I know, but I wish there was more resources. I'm on the kids garden site, but I have to tell you, when I make my calendar, it's really hard. I don't really have anywhere to go. And they all are like, where'd you get that idea? And I'm like, my school social work experience, my play therapy experience, my, gardener, this hydroponics is a big thing for me. I'm a little scared as I'm putting this in place, but I've tried growing under lights. It's dismal here in Colorado. It's kind of a joke. It didn't really work. So anyways, and again, that'll be something where I have to structure that pretty good because I'm still going to be doing tabletop and horticultural based activities, because after the hydroponics are in, again, there's not tons to do. We're kind of checking the pH. I can't have 12 adults just standing around a unit. I think you know what I'm saying. So
yeah, totally. Well, the breadth of what you're doing, Julie, is really impressive. And I have a question for you. Do you think of your garden as a school garden or as a therapeutic garden? I mean, for those of us, because we're all in this field, we recognize that you're doing therapy and you're, doing education. Yeah. It is right. That broad. But when you have to describe it to other people, do you use a specific label?
I say it's social and therapeutic horticulture.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah. And
maybe
yeah. And I've done a big presentation for Colorado Department of Public Health. And I did it at the preschool age of that school garden of how I've adapted stuff. I got to do that in August and that was exciting. So yes, I just say that I'm gardening for all abilities. Do you know what I mean? Because
and
I
I think,
am.
and sometimes we try to attach labels. Again, for those of us, we understand exactly what you're describing, but often for writing grants or introducing what we're trying to do
Right.
with other organizations or administrators, it's broader than that. I mean, we use some broader terms like landscapes for health, and
Yeah.
we use the terms that we've included, but it
Right.
really is wonderful to hear how much therapy you're using in your garden and all of the other pieces that you're building in. Your mud kitchen sounds like tons of fun. I'd like to go in it myself, but I guess I'll have to wait for warmer weather. But you're really doing a lot of wonderful things. So thank you for sharing those ideas, Julie.
You're welcome.
Hey, Carol, can we move on to you? Would you like to share what's working at your school garden or what you have seen work well? And tell us where you're located, Carol.
I'm Carol Dorsey in Mobile, Alabama. And Shauna and I were classmates at HTI and have had a little interaction since our schooling, which has been wonderful. I'm retired and I'm a master gardener. So, I have had more time and a little flexibility because it's not my job. It's my avocation to work with, it's turning it really more into youth. Excuse me. So I work with teenagers in juvenile detention, and I work with some intellectually disabled adults who have aged out of school and other social programs. And Pat Hall, who was in the class with Shauna and me, we have done an after school and summer program with little children in a high crime, lower income neighborhood, and worked this morning to start developing a school garden at a magnet school in Mobile, which will be working with dual enrollment students, junior college and high school, with their botany. And so this is kind of running the whole gamut of a captive population to the kids that have been more empowered. And then what do you do if you've aged out of school programs? So what is working is what we learned in techniques and programming with our HTI training. I'm working toward an advanced certification, master gardener in therapeutic horticulture. I'm not overrepresenting myself because I had a career. I'm not going for another career in HT. I just think that there are so many valuable points that interface our populations who have been bereft of anything very much outside versus folks that are gifted with families and communities that are looking to enrich these children, these youth with biophilia. So what's working is I am codifying our instruction at Strickland, which is the youth detention, and laying out the goals, which are pretty typical for the incarcerated population, and the objectives for each lesson, whether it is a life skill or a soft job skill, which, there's a little fuzz there, and then bringing in a garden story, which is the life skill, and it kind of merges into the garden activity. And then with the garden activity, bringing in, and oftentimes our life skills are around mindfulness, because of the stress of the incarcerated population. We want to reinforce, this is not forever. Can you just be with me for this few moments? And then using those directed instructions, guidance, we take them to the garden, and it's like, what do you see? What do you feel? What do you smell? What do we taste when we're in our tasting time of the year? And how can this be transferred to a higher achieving population with this botany class at the magnet school? Well, that remains to be seen. It's been critical. Shauna was talking about maintenance for school gardens. It's been critical for us to really get with building engineer, the 12-month staff, as we lay this out. We're laying it out with ease of maintenance, but there is still going to have to be some hands-on. And we are building it with the idea of irrigation, so there doesn't have to be somebody on site. I am loving the idea of growing the sweet potatoes through the summer. So it's minimal, but it gives promise for the fall. And I've talked too much. Okay, that's all.
No, you haven't. And Shauna and I are kind of taking turns extracting some of the points that each of us is sharing. Shauna, do you have some comments about the fabulous work that Carol's doing?
When Carol and I were classed together, I had said, and I still at some point intend to get down to Mobile to see the work that she and Pat do, because she only presented a snippet of all of the things that they do. Carol, one of the things that we've talked about doing here, and I wonder if it would work with the students that you're talking about at the dual enrollment school, is to actually have those students, as part of a summer internship, help manage other gardens. We're in the process of starting it now, but if you combine what you're already talking about with the sweet potatoes and low maintenance crops, and actually cover crops are huge to help with summer things. And then on top of that, have those students that have the means, transportation and whatever, they can actually be a summer work team. We're required here to have service hours. Our high school students are required to have service hours. So we've been in discussions about making one of the service opportunities garden maintenance to help out at some of the other schools. So just a thought. I'm excited to hear everything you're doing.
Yeah,
that's good. And this is the nascent phase of this garden. And as we work with the botany professor and the department chair of science and whatever, then I'll have some ammunition to go to them to encourage that continuity, to encourage that engagement, because we're talking about seasons here. And if you go metaphorically and living in Mobile, the people maybe in Colorado and up north, they kind of go to inside between December and February, maybe. Well, we go inside between July and September. It is so blistering hot. Very few things grow except for peppers. And to encourage further engagement, we grow serrano peppers, and they thrive in our climate, and we send them to a company in New York, which turns them into hot sauce. And that company in turn pays us for what we send, and that's helps defray some of the startup costs, but it brings in that entrepreneurial element that I want to be able to share with the youth at La Flor.
Yeah, that's exciting. And that's a wonderful tip to share, because many of our programs, whether they're school gardens or other, we have to generate some income. And that can be challenging. I mean, we have lots of talents. Not all of us want to do fundraising. You know, many of us prefer the therapeutic side, engaging the people that we're working with. So yeah, you've shared a lot of wonderful information with us, Carol. And the one point that I'd like to say is it's obvious that each one of us as individuals can make a huge difference. We know that a lot of master gardeners are involved in people-plant interactions, and certainly helping support school gardens. And, you know, we can create those platforms, as you've indicated, across populations, which, you know, many of us, myself included, most of my school garden experience has been with elementary schools. But certainly hearing you talk about the activities that you're doing and the populations you're working with, you've broadened my perspective on what these school garden and other garden platforms can be. So thank you. That's awesome. I'm going to move on to Karina. And Karina, I'm going to ask you if you can share with us what is working for you or what you have seen working well at school gardens, if you have some ideas. And I see you're muted. Karina, maybe you can unmute. Okay, and if Karina's having trouble, Sarah, I'm going to call on you next. So we'll give Karina a moment. But Sarah, maybe if you're ready to go.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm waiting for Karina to see what's happening. I'm happy to jump in, Lesley, and then if she joins, we can have her done.
So why don't you go ahead?
Awesome. Thank you for doing this, Lesley. This is an awesome kind of little forum to have together. So my name is Sarah Sterling. I work at the Shipley School, which is just outside of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. And I am, for the purpose of this meeting, the coordinator of educational horticulture at our school. We have a pre-K through 12 program. It had historically been just a 9 through 12 program. And recently we've expanded it to be all pre-K through 12. This is an independent day school, gender inclusive, just working with, I guess, very typical, very typical kids. So I received my horticultural therapy certificate from the University of Florida a couple of years ago, and have really been focused on school gardens in non-traditional settings. So Lesley had mentioned briefly before that I had done a recent presentation on really how you can have school-based horticulture programs that don't include school gardens, because certainly there are a lot of settings where that doesn't happen or isn't accessible to students. And so I think one of the things that's going really well here is trying to make a lot of connections between art and science, of which horticulture is completely based. And instead of having all of the focus of school gardens being on, you know, moving kids to these outside spaces, of which I would love to have kids in outside spaces as much as possible, it's really like thinking of creative ways that we can integrate horticulture and gardening into the classroom setting, and have that be available to teachers whenever it makes sense, whether it be in their history program, in their language program, in science, which always seems to be a natural space, but math as well, and STEAM departments that are, I have found, really eager to come up with ways to integrate some of the components of technology as well, and creative problem solving that students are experiencing horticulture in a really hands-on way. We've also tried to think of ways to get students outside but not into school gardens. And so we have a grave gardening program at a local cemetery, which is really cool. And that's something that I love to do and would love to expand in any way. So it's really what's going well is the creative problem solving that goes into the fact that school really happens from, September until June, and gardens here grow really well from June until September. And so if you don't have anyone taking care of them or students there to really enjoy the crops, then you end up with a whole bunch of months when gardening isn't happening, like dreary days in December. So that's where we're at.
That's really interesting, Sarah, and I enjoyed your webinar, and I do hope that other people will look at the recording. I think what I'm hearing and what I'm integrating into my knowledge base is that, and many of us have this challenge, there is not enough physical space at a school to necessarily accommodate all of the students who we want to involve in horticulture or school gardening. And so your approach has been very creative, and it's exciting to think about taking students off-site because they adore doing things like that. And it is that community outreach that can be so important, whether it's just community service or pre-vocational, along the lines of Carol mentioning that too. So, I think that speaks to a lot of the challenges. The school gardens that I've worked at, we've only had, the one in Florida, only one grade level because of the physical limitations on the school garden itself. So you've presented some really interesting ideas for us to think about when we do have those limitations. Thank you. That's interesting. Good. Okay. Karina, you let me know if you want to participate. I'm going to ask Susan Morgan if she's ready to share some of her ideas. And Susan is based in Colorado as well. Susan, are you ready to share some great ideas?
Sure. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Wrong Karina.
Hi, Karina.
Sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead, Karina.
You can go ahead. I'm driving. That's okay. Sorry.
that's okay.
Okay, Karina, if you're not driving at some point, you want to speak up, please feel free to interrupt me. I don't mind. But thanks for sharing that. I'm Susan Morgan. I'm based in the foothills west of Denver, Colorado, and I'm a horticulturist and a parent volunteer at my children's school in the mountains here. We live at about 8,500 feet. I most recently, about 3 years ago, we moved here from Dallas, Texas. So we were a Zone 8 garden, and I worked at public gardens there and have a lot of experience in working at gardens. So moving to a mountain area was quite a drastic change, not only with the winters that we have. And I second Sarah's comments about when school is in session versus when is our active gardening season. And we're pretty much the same season as you. And but we also have a lot of wildlife that come from above and come from below the ground, and dramatic wind and weather changes and hail and rocky soil because we live in the Rocky Mountains. So it's been quite an interesting learning experience for me as a horticulturist to, adapt my skills in gardening here to working with students at my kids' school, which is a pre-K through 5th grade school. And I'm new to this. I went to HTI as well and graduated with my certificate and have worked in a variety of settings in therapeutic horticulture. So I'm new to the school gardening realm, and we just started this summer. And fortunately, at our our school, they happen to have a summer daycare program. So that's all the students from mountain area schools. So it's not just our school, but it's other schools that feed into this program. And so that actually worked quite well for having some kids to be active and participating in the school garden during the summer when seeds need to be sown and plants need to be watered. And so that really worked out to our benefit. I hope that in the future I can collaborate more deeply with them and have a more enriching experience with the students in this program next summer, because their hard work helped us when we started school in August to have something already in place. And so I'm learning as I go. One of the big challenges for me, I don't know if we're sharing that yet, but is I've really been tapping into my hort therapy training in working with groups and managing time and expectations in our activities and what we can get accomplished per our goals. And, you know, when you have 15 minutes, and that's the time that you have, what can you squeeze into that so that it's a meaningful experience in 15 minutes? I'm accustomed to working most recently in working with older adult populations in care communities. And so we would have at least 45 minutes to an hour. So that's been really challenging me to have these very targeted activities and have everything already in place. So one of the activities that we did kind of to wrap up the gardening season was at our school, there's a big mentorship program where the 5th graders mentor the 2nd graders, the 4th graders mentor the 1st graders, the 3rd graders mentor the kindergartners. And there's this real emphasis on the older kids being, as they're getting older, they're becoming more responsible and helping to mentor the younger students. And so we really tapped into that this fall. And this was my first fall in working with the school garden. So we did our 5th grade garden crew they facilitated the 2nd and the 5th graders planting daffodil bulbs in the front of the school, which is great because deer don't like to eat daffodils. But then also the 5th grade garden crew helped plan using herbs from the garden to make herbal butter. And the 5th grade teacher, one of the 5th grade teachers made bread in the bread machine. And then the 4th graders, with the 4th graders that they served the herbal butter to. And then with the 3rd graders, the 5th grade garden crew made minted lemonade, and we made 2 different recipes of mint lemonade. And one had cucumber and mint, and the other one was a very tart lemonade flavor. And everybody was really surprised that they preferred the cucumber mint lemonade. So that was really fun. And again, it was all experimenting to see how long we could extend the garden season. Because we are such a short season here. So we were able to accomplish that in November, and that was quite a accomplishment. So we're really proud. So looking forward to the winter, they have an aquaponics system that we're hoping, trying to round up some parent volunteers to help facilitate that with the lower grades. So stay tuned for that. But I appreciate hearing your input and sharing where you are and what you all are doing. So thanks.
Shauna, do you have some thoughts on Susan's challenges and successes?
I was just going to comment on how much I loved hearing about the cross grades work. I think that's incredibly valuable. And even when we just have 6th graders and 8th graders out at the hoop house at the same time, the 6th graders are much more interested in hearing what the older kids have to say and hearing their intake or their thoughts about the garden, or even just receiving instruction from them on how to plant bulbs or whatever the garden task is. So I think that's wonderful that you have the opportunity to have the older kids and younger kids work together.
I think one of the key points coming out of today's networking forum is one size does not have to fit all. Each of the gardens that have been described so far, we're doing different things. And I think we recognize that we have to integrate in a school's essence, like the mentorship program, which is already in place. you might as well build on that. And again, I think the training and the life experiences that we have, we're recognizing that it's hard to recreate the wheel. And if we already have these successful platforms like a mentorship program or relationships already, then we can focus on some therapeutic goals or educational goals. And, it is exciting to hear all of the different ways that we are working with students and staff. I mean, let's not forget that what we do, we may be trying to directly engage students, but what we're doing is being observed by other parents, by other staff, by the maintenance people as well. And we rely on them to make our programs and what we're doing successful. Great. Okay, Karina, we're going to call on you again. Perhaps you're able to speak.
I can speak and I'm still driving, so I will speak. I am currently enrolled in the HT program at the University of Florida. I previously, probably I think in 2014, completed the Master Gardener program. Right now, I am practicing therapeutic horticulture at a drug rehabilitation facility. And there I had the opportunity to build the garden, and then was later asked to stay on to do the classes with the clientele there. And it's not really a challenge. I guess it really keeps me participating in programs like this and having creativity, because the clientele probably every 4 to 6 weeks changes. So you kind of, it's like, and as you all were talking, I was just thinking, okay, yesterday we had most of the people in the group were new. So it's now, okay, I can go back to doing a class or an activity that I did. So it's really paying attention and not being repetitive, but you have to also know, okay, maybe everybody in the group this week is new with the exception of one person, so you can reintroduce an old activity. That could be a challenge, but for me, I love the opportunity to be creative and come up with different activities. The other thing is that could be a challenge is not everybody wants to participate. It's not like you're in a school garden and everybody comes out and they're having fun. You kind of have to find a way to help the clients want to participate. And so oftentimes I'll say, well, can I please just 5 minutes? You only have to do 5 minutes, just do this activity. And oftentimes, most of the time, they'll participate a little bit longer than the 5 minutes. But then there's some, I don't want my shoes to get dirty. I don't want to get dirty. And then even with gloves and things like that, some people just aren't willing to participate. But overall, if I had to come up with a challenge, it's just really paying attention to when you have a new group and you can recycle activities.
Yeah, interesting that you comment on that, Karina, because I do think that we work in different cycles, and your 4 to 6 week cycle is certainly different than a lot of school gardens that are using the 2-term academic track. But, throughout this forum, we've heard talk of having activities in the summer, after school programs. And so I think being aware that there are different ways that we can cycle this and different ways that we can use activities. It's not always directly aligned with the growing season, although I think our plant knowledge helps us to, if we're doing a 4 to 6 week cycle, then we're going to use plants that are going to germinate quickly. And, maybe then we can have an edible salad within that shorter time period. So interesting points that you raised. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share my tip, and then Jessica, if you have some ideas. Jessica Sullivan is the lady doing the tech side of this with lots of experience working through extension. So I don't know, Jessica, if you have some ideas, but why don't I go next? And the points that I'd like to share, what I have seen work effectively at the gardens that I have volunteered at, are partnerships and funding through local organizations, specifically local restaurants. And now this began on Anna Maria Island Elementary School. Parents running 2 restaurants on the school, and they gave some financial assistance to purchase the school garden materials. And then it evolved into twice a year invitations for the students to dine at their restaurants. And we were using some of the school produce that was grown in the school garden. So there was a real integration of growing, then consuming, recognizing community benefit. And that was quite exciting. And often one of the lunches involved a hands-on activity making lettuce wraps with some of the school ingredients. So the restaurateur / parent / she probably should have been, a horticulturist or trained in horticultural therapy. I think she had that innate knowledge, but it was exciting to see the kids do that. So that was a really interesting partnership, and it has been ongoing for 10 plus years. So that would be the tip that I share. Jessica, do you want to give some ideas?
Just a quick comment. I guess one of the most successful gardening programs in schools that I've worked with was as a direct result of working with the school counselors. That was a really good connection for me. I know everybody at any school anywhere is pulled in 1,000 different directions and lots of pressure and things put on them. But I did find in that situation that the counselor was able to write a grant and focus her programming and goals around some of the gardening programming. And so it was one of the longer lived and, more successful programs that was able to involve, numerous classrooms and things like that. And as an extension agent in Florida, we are asked constantly to come in and do the garden things with the kids, and of course we're not able to do that. We simply don't have the time and capacity to be able to go in and do garden lessons with, lots of schools. Although we do try to train our volunteers to go out and do things like that. But, the biggest challenges are simply that teachers don't have the time to follow through with a lot of things they wish they could, and so it really literally does kind of boil down to who's going to do the garden thing. And so, in the case of working with a counselor, she made that happen, and it was one of the better programs that I participated in.
Right. I think you touch on a key point, Jessica, that there has to be a champion at any school. And sometimes it's a teacher, sometimes it's a counselor, sometimes it's the principal. Certainly without the principal's support, then the students are not going to be granted time to go into the garden, which is a shame and heartbreaking after all of the work that people put into establishing and maintaining the garden. I do think that collaborating with other organizations, and I'm going to throw in a few more points here. I know that botanical gardens are good partners for school gardens. And just as you said, Jessica, often we get invited either as individuals or representing other organizations, Extension or Master Gardeners or other. Oh, can you come in and build the school garden? Well, wait a minute. That's not going to work because we need somebody on site at the school to have that ownership and to have the commitment. And yes, teachers and staff turn over, but we have to, for sustainability reasons, find those key players who are going to make it happen year after year. In Naples, Florida, the Naples Botanical Garden has a program, I believe it's called Collier Greens. Collier is the name of the county, a play on words, collard greens, and they have put in place resources and not supervision, but guidance on how to create school gardens and make them, sustainable and well run. I think another group that obviously can collaborate on school gardens are Master Gardener programs. That's in part how I've participated. So there are organizations within the community that maybe are good partners to do that with. And, sometimes that extends or brings in other people or different perspectives. I know the Colliard Greens program, they had a real focus one year on international gardens and ethnobotany. So they were trying to look at plants that maybe were not necessarily common in the United States, but in the same climate, which is part of the theme of the Naples Botanical Garden, looking at that latitude and then what gardens are growing and what plants grow. So, again, I think it sounds like all of us are drawing from our communities, using the resources that are there and then giving back. And I do think, that is one of the strengths of what we do. Okay, so I think we have called on everybody, and Shauna, help me if I have missed anybody, but I think we have heard some fabulous tips from everyone. Shauna, have I called on everybody?
Yes, everybody that I see on my screen, yes.
Yeah, sounds good. And I think even though we were focusing on what was working well, I have one more tip, if you will allow me this indulgence. I do some work in Nova Scotia, Canada, and one of the things that I have seen that is particularly effective, and I've written on this with probably some of you, the Nova Scotia Provincial Department of Education is working with, and this is part of this collaboration with other organizations, a nonprofit called Nourish Nova Scotia, and it's an organization that is run by nutritionists. So they took over responsibility for school gardens after being given the jurisdiction or responsibility and funding for school lunches, school snacks. And so what morphed into this real focus on nutritious food was this involvement in school gardens. And that really pumped up and elevated everybody's awareness of food security, nutrition, and they really took it to a new level in that, yes, they shared resources on how to create school gardens and what plants were going to thrive, but then they included things like student-led videos, and they had competitions. They were doing some fundraising. Then that expanded into food procurement program with local farmers. And so what began as school snacks led by dietitians and nutritionists who had a very specific focus, but who, looked at the universe in much broader terms, really has been very successful within that province. I haven't seen it replicated. And again, those circumstances might be difficult for some of us in other communities or states or provinces to do. But I think often we're inspired by what other people come up with, what their ideas, and maybe we can do it in a smaller scale. So I think that's, food for thought, So
it's here in Colorado that funded, and I'm still a part of that group, and that's why I presented. But that farm to table group is active here in Colorado. So Susan, just so you know, I can send you some of the links because they funded me putting in my garden.
Awesome. Yeah.
If I could just say too, Lesley, to me, that really speaks to what you said earlier about developing relationships. And for me, is a good reminder to look beyond the typical places I would think. I certainly haven't talked to our nutritionists at school, but that our garden guardians or our garden champions don't necessarily have to be the science teacher or the counselor or whatever. It might be anybody in the school. So that's a good reminder to just build relationships.
Yeah, which Sarah, you talked about that with the cemetery gardening, and Carol, you mentioned that with the juvenile detention facility. So, I think these forums allow us to see some themes. And even though we may feel as if we're working in isolation and, we feel like we're reinventing the wheel, in fact, I think we are getting good ideas from each other and we're being inspired about what the next step might be or who else we can bring onto the team to allow us to do activities. One of the items that is always a challenge with school and other gardens, especially food gardens, is safe food handling. And I don't think that has come up today. So let me just kind of throw this out and maybe people have comments on this. this garden coordinator may be a fabulous gardener or horticulturist, and they may not be aware of safe food handling regulations. But now that many of the gardens that we're talking about today are in fact growing food and is being consumed in school cafeterias, or the example that I shared actually with the students in the restaurant, we have to be aware of safe handling of food. When Shauna and I were talking about this a week ago, it became apparent that the regulations, I think, are state-based. And so some of the regulations related to growing and handling food may be set by the state regulators. But I think that, that's something that we each might want to look into. But that relates to washing station when we're harvesting produce, and how are we washing it? What water are we using? What containers are we using to transport food to the cafeteria? Sometimes that food goes home with the students' families, or in my case, a restaurant partner. And we got better at including the kids to wear gloves. That's one of the key pieces, not only for the protection of some children who may have allergies or sensitivities, and they were cleaned after each session. So there are some important aspects, whether it's a food garden or not. So, I think we've heard some of the challenges, but I have to say in this forum, most of us, and usually it's a person identifying the challenge, I think each of you have come up with pretty good solutions. Are there some other key challenges that were maybe each of us experiencing the same? Shauna, are you thinking of any that seem to be common?
Well, I guess the challenge related to times that the garden can't be worked on, and in the South, kind of as Carol has talked about, it's definitely the summertime when it's too hot. And my garden hat, my gardener's hat, says, well, the answer is cover crops. But what I actually discovered at a meeting of our local garden group is that that's not just a soil solution, it's actually a person solution too. Our superintendent of sustainability was present at one of our school garden group meetings. And he said it's really discouraging for teachers and for new parents and for kids to come back to school at the end of the summer and see a messy garden space filled with weeds. And he said, we really need to do better about making sure that there's maintenance over the summer, which is easy for him to say because he doesn't have to get the volunteers to come do things. But actually, cover crop is another good solution to that. It looks more organized. You can explain that there's a purpose for it. There's all the science lessons and other lessons that can go into it. And then it gives you an activity right away when the students get there in the fall to terminate that cover crop and talk about what you're going to plant next, or however you choose to use it. But for us here, at least, that's been a valuable lesson to learn and lesson to put in place with our gardens.
Yeah, I think that is a big challenge. How do we make sure that the gardens don't go haywire when there is some dormancy? Now, the San Antonio, Texas school garden that I volunteered with, the process that they used, they asked families to sign up to take responsibility for maintaining the garden 1 week at a time. And that was a bit challenging because we had to, get the water key, and perhaps drip irrigation is one of the solutions if watering is an issue throughout the summer or the dormant seasons. But, I would say, was that 100% successful? No, not really. But probably if we had someone whose only task was to phone and remind the family, hello, it's your week to do it. Now, that school garden was interesting in that they didn't have enough school garden capacity for all of the students to garden, but they really wanted everybody involved. And so their solution was that outside of each of the classrooms, and there were a fair number of portables, each classroom built their own little garden. And some of them were like 2x4, some of them were like 20x40, well, maybe not quite that large. And some of them were pollinator gardens, some of them were food gardens. But again, that gave that ownership, which I think is essential for a school garden maintaining itself. I mean, there's nothing more disheartening than somebody like us working really, really hard. We have the right person in year one and we can get a lot going. And then year two, personnel changes, we maybe move and the garden falls into disrepair. So I think there is something to capacity building, but that's easier said than done for sure. Good. Okay, I'm going to open up the floor for any last comments. It's about time for us to wrap it up. And just before we hear those last comments, we are recording this, so this may become a video that we put on the Florida Horticulture for Health Network YouTube channel. We do have a handout that Shauna and I prepared, so that will be sent to you, thanks to Jessica. And I think that we have heard a lot of really interesting ideas. It certainly has been inspiring me to know that there's so much work going out there. I wish, we could talk for hours, but I'm going to open up the floor if anybody wants to say anything, challenges, tips, comments, others. It's a free for all. Please share.
There's some good resources that were put into the chat box that I'm going to copy and put into the email when I send out about an upcoming National Children and Garden Youth or National Children Youth Gardening Symposium coming up. And then also Susan shared about an online program for nature-based learning in schools.
Super. That's great. Thank you for watching the chat box, Jessica. Okay, any other comments? Great. Well, this has been a really lovely forum, a really lovely group of people. And, thank you all for the work that you're doing. We're working across populations, across age groups. Often we're integrating what we're doing through school gardens as the platform for working in a broader community capacity or with adults as well. So thank you all for sharing, and good luck with your work. Certainly look at the Florida Horticulture for Health Network's website. The Resource Hub has information. There is some revisions happening, and I'm thinking of the corrections population. We have new resources coming out on research that identifies the positives of gardening with youth and juvenile detention, but across populations. So thank you, Shauna, for co-hosting. Thank you, Jessica, for being the tech guru, and thank you all for participating today.